Hey everybody, it's Doug from Pack Attack Cards here. I am working on a grading submission, so I thought I'd kind of walk everyone through this process. I've got a few cards picked out that I may be sending in for grading, and I kind of just wanted to walk through the process with everyone as I was going through it. A lot of these cards I already have in card savers. So typically when I'm looking at a card to grade, the Prism here is a good example. Going to take it out, going to take a look at the card raw. And I usually like to have a good light source. In this case, I'm using a light box. You can order these off of Amazon, and really just gives kind of good lighting. So I'm looking, typically I'll first start with the corners. So you obviously want to have really sharp corners. Don't want to have any fraying at the edges. So you want to look front and back, all four corners. These corners look really good. Sometimes I kind of look at them at an angle just to make sure that there aren't any minor imperfections that are going to take off some points. Want to be able to get 10s on the corners. So that's usually kind of low-hanging fruit. The sides, usually just make sure there aren't any kind of nicks or dents in the side. That tends to not be an issue with Prism. The next thing is surface, which does tend to be an issue with Prism. Actually, we'll do centering first. So centering is basically looking at the card side to side and top to bottom to kind of make sure that it's cut in the center. On the Prism cards, it's actually pretty nice because that's nice and then can backfire as well, but it's kind of easy to center these. You can kind of look at these divots, little dimples here. Should be 3 rows on each side. These look like they're about the same distance from the edge, almost exactly. I think it's just very, very minimally different. As far as the centering top to bottom, it's you kind of just have to get a sense looking at a lot of these. The biggest issue I see with Prism cards is that this top line here will sometimes be all the way kind of up near the edge. So this card looks like it's got some decent space. Lastly, we'll go through the surface. I usually take a microfiber cloth and just very gently wipe down the surface to get away any dust, any blemishes, any finger smudges. Before I take a final pass, I kind of just run the light over the card gradually to make sure there aren't any surface imperfections. Sometimes they'll get dust kind of caught between the cards and it'll cause a kind of a divot in the card. The other thing you'll see is kind of roller scratches or marks from the printer on these sometimes. It just kind of depends. PSA often won't ding you for that if it's kind of minor. BGS is a little bit more strict from what I understand. The other thing that you'll kind of notice on some of these cards, the Prism cards in particular, is there's sometimes these little kind of divots or imperfections up here on the top of the card, and they kind of vary. So those little grooves in the top will have kind of spaces missing or slightly indented, and I'm not sure exactly how much they take off for that, but I usually try to note it. So anyways, this card I think looks really great. I think this will be at least a 9.5. So after I take a look at it, I carefully put it in a penny sleeve. Place it back in a penny sleeve, and then place it in a card saver. So this is kind of the preferred method for PSA and BGS. PSA, I believe, tends to be a little bit stricter on what they accept. So just make sure that you're submitting the way that you're supposed to. They also have thicker card savers, so this is a card saver 1. They also have a card saver 2, which is, I think, fairly similar if I'm not mistaken. Card saver 4, see if I've got one here. Yeah. Card saver 4 are really large, and they're kind of better for memorabilia or thicker cards instead of trying to squeeze the card into one of those card saver 1s. So here's a rookie jersey auto, Patrick Mahomes. It was too thick to fit in a card saver 1, so I just put it into this card saver 4. And they tend to hold in there fairly well. I think some people kind of try to use some tape to make sure the card doesn't fall out, but generally it's not too much of an issue. So that's the process. I'm going to keep doing this through all the cards that I have here. A lot of it too is I've got some of these cards kind of put away from last year, and I have to decide if I'm still wanting to submit them or not. This is another set, Optic. It's kind of similar to Prism in that they tend to have the same kind of issues. Any of these shiny cards will be kind of similar. Corners don't tend to have quite as much trouble. Edges, you might find a little bit of chipping sometimes, but I tend to not be too bad. Surface and centering tend to be kind of difficult on these. Here's an example where you kind of have to shine the light back and forth to even notice, but it's very minor. You can see the reflection kind of changing here, right about there. Just a very minor imperfection, but it might be what keeps this card from getting a 10. Otherwise, this one looks really good. Optic sets, usually very easy to check centering, just like the Prisms. You got equal borders pretty much on all sides. Same on the back. The centering on the back looks like a little bit off here, left to right, a little bit bigger border on the left than the right, but it's fairly minor. I'm guessing this one would, just if I had to guess, would be about a 9.5. But we'll see. I think it might still be worth submitting. Anyways, actually, now that I'm looking, if you looked from the front, there wasn't much to notice, but you can see just a very, 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 very tiny imperfection. So certainly not enough that you would notice it without looking extremely closely right there. So this is one that would be at least near mint, but that little tiny imperfection might potentially take this one down a notch. So it's really kind of looking over these things with a fine-tooth comb, and it's expensive to submit, so I typically don't submit unless I feel like it's going to get a 10, and then I usually will expect a 9 instead, and that way I'm kind of happily surprised if it turns out better. Anyways, feel free to share your own tips and tricks. If you agree, disagree, love to hear your thoughts. Just put a note down in the comments. All right, thanks for your time.